More on Brexit's impact on the pharmaceutical industry, I spoke to Thomas Moore. He is a senior healthcare analyst at GlobalData, and I began by asking whether he agreed with the CEO of the British pharmaceutical industry, who said a no-deal scenario is not in the best interest of patients.
Yeah, this is definitely something which I think I share. The pharmaceutical industry in the UK is subject to a lot of regulations, more so than other sectors in the UK. For example, you have regulations regarding the approval of new drugs. There's a lot of regulations regarding the research and development of new drugs, and also the drug supply chain, so the movement of drugs and drug precursors in and out of the UK from Europe. Furthermore, any change in these regulations, which results in consumers not having access to certain products, could have much greater consequences in the pharmaceutical industry compared to other sectors, because in this case, we could be talking about patients not having access to life-saving medicines. And because of that, I think the general consensus is that there's a lot more to lose because of a no-deal Brexit scenario in the pharmaceutical sector compared to maybe other sectors.
So lay out the biggest concerns in the pharmaceutical sector for us when it comes to Brexit and how to navigate the divorce.
So when GlobalData surveyed professionals in the pharmaceutical industry in June this year, we found that regulatory concerns were the greatest concern. In fact, 65% of those we surveyed said that this was a major concern for after Brexit. Since then, there's also been other concerns raised by the pharmaceutical industry with respect to the drug supply chain. So the UK is a major manufacturer of pharmaceuticals within Europe, and many of the precursors and raw materials for that manufacturing process come from European countries into the UK. So if there's any reason that this supply chain is impeded due to a no-deal Brexit, that could have consequences on the UK being able to continue manufacturing drugs, and that could affect the supply of drugs to those within the UK and also countries that the UK exports to.
So how is the industry then preparing for the possibility of a no deal?
Well, the UK government's issued quite a few different technical notices and advice on how to prepare for a no deal. I think the most important one of these is probably that they've asked pharmaceutical companies to stockpile 6 weeks worth of drugs in the UK in case of a no deal Brexit. Obviously, this comes with significant costs to pharmaceutical companies. In fact, I saw that AstraZeneca this week announced that they spent £40 million, which is over $50 million so far, stockpiling drugs. However, the UK government has said that it intends to reimburse the costs that have been incurred because of this.
Talk about some of the other impacts of stockpiling, because that's one way to handle this, but there's always going to be a reaction to that type of scenario and that type of solution.
Yeah, well, I think the cost is the major issue there. There are certain drugs where you can't store them for long periods of time too. So, for example, certain biologic drugs, they have sell-by dates that they need to be administered to patients within a certain time of manufacturing. So there are implications there. But in general, I think the cost implications are probably the ones that the pharmaceutical industry are most worried about.
You talk about the UK being a major producer and the EU being a major supplier of the ingredients that go into medications. What about the impact on the UK just of the research and development of these medications with respect to the outcome of Brexit?
Well, there obviously has been some concern as to whether or not the UK can continue to be a world-leading centre of research and development of pharmaceuticals after Brexit. That we do rely on a lot of those within the EU moving to the UK to help us with that research process. And certainly, when we surveyed workers in the pharmaceutical industry, asking them this question, we found that in general, I think it was 37% of those in the UK and only 29% of those in the EU believe that the UK will continue to be an attractive location to be carrying out research and development for pharmaceuticals after Brexit. However, I would say that the uncertainty that we currently have surrounding the final deal probably affects this particularly negative sentimentality that we're seeing at the moment.
So there's already been some movement from the UK to the EU, but what are some alternate destinations for healthcare players so that they can straddle the divide that's going to occur here? If they can't be in the UK and service the EU the same way, they're going to move somewhere in the EU. Where might that be?
Yeah, well, so we've seen the European Medicine Agency moving its headquarters they're in the process of moving the headquarters from London to Amsterdam. There was some suggestion that pharmaceutical companies may follow them there. There's a lot of pharmaceutical companies that have their corporate offices in London, and they benefit from being so close to the EMA. However, we haven't seen that a huge amount, and actually, when we asked those in the pharmaceutical industry, we found that in general, I think most people aren't expecting huge movements of offices and workers. They are expecting there to continue to be a presence in the UK from a corporate and an R&D perspective after Brexit.